By the darkness of Milan, love is the most dangerous crime of all. The envelope appeared on Elena Vasquez's desk at precisely 8:47 in the morning, between her still steaming espresso and the stack of vendor invoices she'd been meaning to file since Tuesday. It was cream-coloured, heavy stock, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than her lunch. Elena picked it up and turned it over. No name on the back, just the embossed seal of Conti Enterprises pressed into the wax like a signet ring from another century. She thought about that for a moment. Who still used wax seals in the 21st century? And then she peeled it open. The letter inside was brief, 3 paragraphs. Her eyes moved quickly through the first 2, processing the corporate language with the efficient boredom of someone who'd spent 4 years reading exactly this kind of memo. Effective immediately. Restructuring of the executive suite, relocation to the 42nd floor. Then she reached the 3rd paragraph and stopped. The position of personal secretary to the director has been filled by appointment. Ms. Elena Vasquez is hereby assigned to this role, effective Monday, January 9th. Compensation will reflect the significance of the appointment. She read it again, then a 3rd time. Mara. She turned in her chair. Her desk neighbour, Mara Fontana, was already watching her with an expression Elena couldn't quite name, something between pity and the specific, concentrated excitement of a person who has witnessed something catastrophic from a safe distance. Did you know about this? Mara was 26, Milanese born, and had been at Conti Enterprises for 3 years longer than Elena. She had the institutional knowledge that came from long tenure and the self-preservation instincts of someone who'd watched what happened to people who drew the wrong kind of attention. The director's office called down yesterday, Mara said, carefully. They asked for your personnel file. And you didn't think to mention that? I thought it might be nothing. Mara's voice had dropped to the register she used when she wanted to discuss something without the open plan office hearing. Elena, do you know who Dante Conti is? He runs the company. Elena glanced at the letter again. He's the director. He runs... Mara stopped herself, looked down at her keyboard, looked back up. Yes, he runs the company. There was something in the pause that Elena filed away, the way she filed most things, neatly, efficiently, for later examination. She was a practical woman. She'd come to Milan from Chicago 3 years ago with a linguistics degree, a talent for organization, and the particular boldness of someone who had nothing specific to lose. She'd taken the administrative position at Conti Enterprises because the pay was good, the office was beautiful, and she'd wanted to stay in Italy. She hadn't come to understand every social undercurrent. She hadn't come to read rooms. I should go up and confirm the appointment, she said. Mara stared at her. You're going to go up there? That's what the letter says. Effective immediately. Elena. Mara leaned forward. Around them, the open plan office had acquired that particular stillness that happens when 20 people are pretending not to listen. Nobody goes up there unless they're summoned. Nobody. Chiara was up there for 6 weeks as his secretary before... She stopped again. She left the company. Was she fired? She resigned. She said... Mara lowered her voice further. She said she couldn't work for him, that she couldn't be in the same room as him without feeling like she was going to... She made a small gesture that might have meant anything. She's working at a hotel in Verona now. She seems very happy. Elena considered this. She thought about the letter. about the 42nd floor, about the raise that was implied but not specified, about the fact that she had roughly 1,100 euros in her savings account and her landlord had just informed her that her rent was increasing by 300 euros a month, starting in February. "It's a promotion," she said. "I'll go up this afternoon." She went up at 2 o'clock. The elevator to the 42nd floor required a separate keycard, which the building's security desk provided her, after a phone call that involved 2 different people and a verification code. The ride up was smooth and silent. The doors opened onto a corridor that felt like a different building entirely, different air, different quality of light, different carpet that swallowed the sound of her heels. The executive suite reception desk was staffed by a man in his 40s with the focused, watchful stillness of someone trained to notice things. He looked at her badge. He looked at her face. He nodded. "Ms. Vasquez, Mr. Conti is in a meeting. You'll begin on Monday. Maria will show you your office." He gestured to a woman who'd appeared from a doorway without sound. "I should tell you, the director has specific expectations: punctuality, discretion, the ability to work without asking unnecessary questions." "I'm good at all of those," Elena said. She followed Maria down the corridor. Through a glass-walled conference room, she caught a glimpse, just a glimpse, of the meeting in progress. 4 men around a long table, 3 of them she didn't recognize. The 4th was sitting at the head of the table with his back half turned to the glass, one hand resting on the table, the other holding a phone he wasn't looking at. He was tall, even seated, dark-haired, still in the absolute considered way of someone who has learned that stillness is its own form of power. She couldn't see his face from this angle. She turned back and followed Maria. She didn't think about it again until she was home that evening, sitting at her kitchen table with the letter and a glass of wine, running the numbers on the implied salary increase. She thought, "This is a good thing." She thought, "I can handle difficult bosses." She thought, "Mara worries too much." She didn't think, "I'm about to walk into a life I won't recognize on the other side." She didn't think that, because she didn't know yet. She didn't know anything yet. Monday was 6 days away. She wore the navy blazer. She'd owned it for 2 years and worn it exactly 4 times. Job interviews, client meetings, the one occasion she'd been asked to sit in on a board presentation and hadn't been told until 20 minutes before. It was a serious blazer, an I mean business blazer. She arrived at 8:45 on Monday morning. The man at the reception desk, she'd learned his name was Enzo, looked up from his computer with an expression of mild surprise that she interpreted as approval. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early." She set her bag down on the surface of the reception desk. "Can you walk me through the morning protocols?" Enzo walked her through the morning protocols. They were extensive. The director took his espresso at 9:15, prepared in a specific way: single shot, no milk, 1 sugar, cup warmed first. His calendar was to be confirmed the evening before and again at 8:50 each morning. His calls were to be screened through her. She was to take a message unless the call was listed on a short roster of names he'd approve, which she would receive by end of day. His meetings were not to be rescheduled without his explicit authorization. His lunch was almost never in the office, but when it was ordered from one of 3 specific places. "He's precise," she said. It wasn't a question. "He is," Enzo agreed. Something moved in his expression. "He will test you, not deliberately. But the work itself will... There are days when things move quickly, when decisions happen fast and the pace changes without warning. You'll need to stay level." "I'm level," she said. "The last 3 secretaries weren't." She thought about Chiara in Verona. How many have there been? In 4 years, Enzo appeared to calculate. 7. She let that number settle. 7 secretaries in 4 years. That was one every 7 months, approximately. That was a significant turnover rate. What happened to them? She asked. Different things. He returned his attention to his computer. You'll want to go set up your office. The director arrives at 9. Her office was a glass-walled room adjacent to the director's suite, with a clear sightline to both the main entrance and the conference room. She'd been given a standing desk, a high-spec computer, and a leather chair that probably cost more than her first car. The desk had a small vase with a single white orchid on it. She noted this because it seemed deliberate, like everything else on this floor. She was organising her pens. She had a system, always had, when she heard it. Not a sound, exactly, more an absence of sound, the way the reception area went quiet. She looked up. He came through the main doors at exactly 9 o'clock. She knew this because she'd positioned her monitor so she could see the clock on its edge without turning, an organisational habit from years of managing schedules. Exactly 9. Not 9:01, not 8:59. Dante Conti was 38 years old, though she wouldn't learn that until later. He was built like someone who had been described once, in her hearing, as a man who made rooms feel smaller just by being in them. She understood that now. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and broad-shouldered in the way that spoke of something other than a gym membership. His suit was charcoal, perfectly fitted, the kind of tailoring that required multiple fittings. His dark hair was slightly longer than corporate convention would suggest, brushed back from a face that was— she registered this with the efficient, neutral appraisal she'd learned to apply to relevant data— strikingly structured. Sharp jaw, darker eyes than she'd expected at this distance, a mouth that, at rest, suggested a person who had made a decision about how much of himself to show the world. He walked through the reception area without slowing. People around him, the 2 assistants at their stations, Enzo, seemed to tilt slightly, the way compass needles tilt toward north. He was almost past her office when he stopped. He turned. His gaze found her through the glass with the kind of unerring precision that she'd later think of as characteristic. Not searching, arriving, as if he'd already known where she was and was simply allowing his attention to follow. She met his eyes, held them, nodded once, in the professional acknowledgement of a person who is new to a position and is establishing competence. She watched something flicker in his expression, something that wasn't quite surprise, because she had the sense, strongly, that this was a man who was rarely surprised, but something adjacent to it, an adjustment. He looked at her for 3 seconds, then he continued walking. Enzo appeared at her doorway 40 seconds later. "He'd like to see you at 9:30, he said. His voice was carefully neutral. "In his office." "Of course." She made a note in her calendar. 9:30, director meeting. She underlined it once, which was her system for high-priority items. Enzo lingered. "You looked at him," he said. She turned from her monitor. "I'm sorry?" "When he walked in, you looked at him directly." A pause. "Most people don't." "I'm his secretary," Elena said. "I'm going to need to look at him fairly regularly." She heard, very distinctly, the sound of Enzo suppressing something. "Yes," he said. "I suppose you will." He left. She arrived at the director's office at 9:28. The door was open. She knocked twice on the frame. Her mother had taught her that. Knock even on open doors, because an open door is an invitation, not permission. And waited. "Come in." His voice was lower than she'd expected. Accented Italian that carried the particular music of someone who'd grown up speaking it before they learned English. She came in. The office was the size of her entire apartment, glass on two sides, offering a view of Milan that on a clear day would show the Alps. Today the city was wrapped in January fog, and the view was all grey and silver and the ghost outlines of rooftops. He was seated behind a desk that was, somehow, both very large and very uncluttered. Two folders, a laptop, a phone, the espresso she'd had prepared for him, which he hadn't touched yet. His hands were resting on the desk, and she noticed his hands. She noticed hands. It was a quirk of hers. Large, well-formed, a thin scar along the left knuckle that was old enough to be white. "Miss Vasquez." He looked at her with the same direct attention he'd applied through the glass. "Sit down." She sat. "You've read the role requirements?" "I have." "And you understand the confidentiality requirements?" "I do." A pause. He turned the espresso cup a quarter turn, regarding her with an expression she couldn't categorize yet. She had a good read on people, she always had, but this man was arranged differently than most. His expression gave her the shape of a thought, without the content. "You're American," he said. "From Chicago." "Why Milan?" "I wanted to live somewhere interesting." His eyes changed, very slightly. "Most Americans who come to Italy say they wanted to live somewhere beautiful." "Beautiful is nice," she said, "but interesting lasts longer." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You'll shadow Enzo for the first week. By the second week, I expect you to operate independently. My schedule does not accommodate learning curves." His tone wasn't cold, exactly. It was a temperature below that, the kind of precise, unsentimental clarity that made it impossible to take personally. "Do you have questions?" "One." She'd prepared it on the elevator up. "Who are the calls I always put through?" He opened the top desk drawer without looking at it, the gesture of someone who knows exactly where everything is, and slid a single index card across the desk toward her. 8 names. She read them, committed them to memory in the way she'd learned to do with information that mattered, not a rehearsal of the words, but an act of actually caring about them. She slid the card back. "Thank you." He watched her do this. Then he picked up the espresso, looked at it, looked at her. "You warmed the cup." "That's the protocol," she said. "Chiara never warmed the cup." He didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like a data point. "Then I'm already ahead of Chiara," Elena said. The silence that followed was exactly 2 seconds long. She counted them. When he spoke again, his voice had changed by approximately nothing, and yet something in it had shifted, a frequency she couldn't name. "You may go, Miss Vasquez." She stood. She walked to the door. "Vasquez." She turned. He was looking at the window now, the fog, the grey city below. "Don't be late," he said. "I won't be," she said, and left. She asked Enzo about the 7 secretaries on Thursday. She'd been waiting for the right moment, not calculated exactly, but instinctive. She'd learned in Chicago that information came more freely when people had decided you were trustworthy, and people decided you were trustworthy when you'd proven you could hold what they gave you. 4 days of watching her work, she reasoned, was enough for Enzo to develop a read on her. They were in the kitchen, adjacent to the executive suite, waiting for the espresso machine's second cycle. The kitchen was small and immaculate, and had the quality of a room where people said things they wouldn't say at their desks. "The first one," Enzo said, keeping his voice low from force of habit, "was brilliant, organized, efficient, loyal. She lasted 18 months. He paused. She became too attached. Attached how? He looked at her levelly, personally. Elena absorbed this. And the director handled it as he handles most things that become inconvenient. A flat pause. He's not a man who tolerates complications. The others? The second had a breakdown. Nothing happened to her. The pace broke her. She hadn't been properly assessed for the role. He handed her a cup. The third was incompetent, which was an HR failure. The fourth resigned for personal reasons that had nothing to do with the job. The fifth, he stopped. Enzo. The fifth discovered things she shouldn't have discovered. He held her gaze with the specific steadiness of a man choosing his words. She was let go. The espresso machine completed its second cycle with a sound like a small, polite exhale. "And the sixth and seventh?" Elena asked. "The sixth couldn't handle his manner. He is not... His manner can be..." Enzo chose a word the way a surgeon chooses an instrument. "Demanding." Without softening. Some people find it difficult to remain professional under that kind of pressure. "And the seventh?" "She lasted 3 weeks. I don't know why she left. She simply didn't come back one Tuesday." He turned to pick up his cup. "Why are you asking?" "Because I like to know what I'm working with," she said. "All the information, not just the job description." He was quiet for a moment. Then, the fifth secretary. The things she discovered. He looked at the middle distance, as if reading something there. "I'm telling you this because I think you should know. Not because I want you to be afraid, but because I want you to understand the weight of the word discretion on this floor." She waited. "This company is involved in ventures that do not appear in the annual report," Enzo said carefully. "As the personal secretary, you will encounter the edges of those ventures, documents, conversations, schedules. You will see things that don't fit the official picture." A pause. "The director values loyalty above almost everything else. But loyalty, in his world, requires knowing what you're being loyal to." "And what is he being loyal to?" she asked. "His family," Enzo said simply, in the broadest sense of that word. She thought about that on the walk back to her desk. She thought about the family photographs she'd noticed in his office, not displayed openly, but visible at an angle from a certain position. 4 people. Dante Conti, younger, in a dark suit. An older man she recognized from a framed portrait in the lobby, Aldo Conti, founder, deceased 5 years. A woman, about the director's age. A boy. She'd learned that morning, from a press release in the company archive she'd been organizing, that Conti Enterprises had been founded by Aldo Conti in 1987 and had grown from a regional real estate firm into a diversified holding company with interests in construction, logistics, private equity, and several other sectors that the press release described with the comfortable vagueness of corporate language. She hadn't thought much about the vagueness. She'd been too busy warmed espresso cups and managing the calendar of a man who scheduled meetings the way other people breathed, instinctively, continuously, with no apparent effort. On Friday afternoon, she brought him the week's end summary, a one-page document she'd created herself, synthesizing the week's completed tasks, outstanding items, and next week's calendar priorities. It hadn't been requested. She'd made it because she thought it was useful. He read it without speaking. She stood at the correct distance, close enough to answer questions, far enough to give him space, a distinction she'd calibrated to exactly 2.5 arms lengths over the past week. He turned to the second page. There was a second page because she'd anticipated 3 questions he'd be likely to ask and answered them preemptively. She watched him read the second page. He set it down. He looked at her. "This is the first time a summary has been prepared without my asking," he said. "I thought it would save time." He was quiet for a moment. In her week on this floor, she'd begun to learn his quiet. There were different kinds. There was the quiet of a man who was thinking. There was the quiet of a man who was displeased. There was the quiet of a man who was considering something he hadn't expected to consider. This was the third kind. "Your predecessor," he said at last, "spent her third Friday here calling in sick." "I don't call in sick unless I'm sick," she said. "And I have a strong immune system." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. So small she almost missed it. Not quite a smile. Something that had the shape of a smile without any of the warmth. A signal she couldn't decode yet. "Go home, Ms. Vasquez," he said. "Enjoy your weekend." She nodded, turned to leave. "Vasquez?" She stopped. She was beginning to understand that this was a pattern, the summoning when she was almost gone. She wasn't sure yet what it meant. "The second page." He tapped the summary. "The question about the Ferrara account. How did you know I'd want that answered?" She thought about how to say what she wanted to say, then decided on honesty, because she'd found that honesty, delivered with the right tone, was often the most efficient approach. "You mentioned it twice, in passing this week," she said. "Once on Wednesday in a phone call, you said the Ferrara situation, in a way that suggested unresolved concern. Once on Thursday, when you asked me to pull a file. The way you looked at it, you didn't read it, you put it back. That's a man with a question he hasn't asked yet." The silence was longer this time. "Who trained you?" he asked. "Nobody," she said. "I read people." She left. On the elevator down, she was aware of a feeling she couldn't immediately name, a kind of aliveness in her nerves that was different from the mild buzz of a productive week, as if she'd touched something that held an electrical charge and survived it. She put it away, filed it under "Examine later." It would be 3 weeks before she examined it. "You haven't run away yet," Mara said. They were having aperitivo at a bar 3 blocks from the office. Elena's idea. A Friday ritual she'd established in her first month in Milan and maintained with the consistency she applied to most things. The bar was small and old and served Aperol spritzes the way God intended, with a properly bitter Aperol to Prosecco ratio and a fat green olive on the side. "Why would I run away?" Elena set her drink down. "Because—" Mara made the particular gesture of a person who wants to say something, but isn't sure they should. "Because of who he is." "You've said that before." Elena looked at her. "And then you stop, every time." She'd been patient. She'd been, she felt, admirably patient. Mara, I'd been his secretary for 3 weeks. I can handle whatever you're trying not to tell me. Mara looked at her spritz. How much do you know about the Conti family? I know the company history, the founder's background, public record. The public record. Mara smiled in a way that had nothing to do with amusement. The public record says Aldo Conti was a businessman from Palermo who built a real estate empire. She lowered her voice, though the bar noise was enough to cover them. What the public record doesn't say is what everybody who's been in Milan long enough knows, that the Conti family was, one of the 4 families. Elena looked at her. What 4 families? Mara stared at her. Elena, the 4 families. You really don't know? I'm from Chicago, Elena said. I grew up watching political corruption, not organized crime. What 4 families? Oh, God. Mara took a long drink of her spritz. Okay, the short version. In Italy, in the north specifically, there are families that are... She chose her words with the care of someone navigating a field she suspected was mined. They're influential, in ways that are not entirely legal. They have business interests, legitimate ones, and others. The Contis were one of those families. Were? Ah. Mara set her glass down. Aldo Conti died 5 years ago. His son took over the business, both businesses, the legitimate company and the other one. She looked at Elena steadily. Dante Conti runs Conti Enterprises. He also runs what his father built before the company. Elena, people are afraid of him. Not in a difficult boss way, in a real way. Elena sat with this information for a moment. She turned it, the way she turned problems, not away from the hard side, but toward it. He's in the Mafia, she said. The word felt strange in her mouth in this context, in this bar, in Milan, 3 weeks after she'd started being his secretary. Mara flinched. Don't say that word. Don't say it here. Don't say it in the office. She leaned in. Plausible deniability is what keeps people like us safe. People like us. People who work for him without being, she gestured vaguely, part of it. Elena thought about what Enzo had said, involved in ventures that do not appear in the annual report. She thought about the names on the index card, 8 names, none of which had shown up in any public search she'd done. She thought about the men who came to the 42nd floor at odd hours, who never signed in at reception the way regular visitors did. She thought about the file she'd been asked to prepare on a company called Meridian Holdings that didn't seem to actually exist in any corporate registry. She thought about the scar on his left hand. And you still work there, she said to Mara. You've worked there for 7 years. Because the pay is exceptional, and nobody bothers us on the lower floors, as long as we do our jobs and don't ask questions. Mara met her eyes. But you are on the 42nd floor, Elena. You are in the room. That's different. Different how? Because you see things. Because he talks in front of you. Because... Mara stopped, considered. Because people who are in the room are either trusted completely or they're a liability. And you've been there 3 weeks, which means he's made a decision about you. Elena thought about the summary, the second page, the question she'd answered before he'd asked it. She thought about 3 seconds of eye contact through a glass wall, and the way he'd stopped, precisely, as if her stillness had interrupted his motion. "I can handle it," she said. Mara looked at her for a long moment. That's exactly what all 7 of the others said. She picked up her glass. 3 of them were right. Which 3? The 3 who are still breathing and employed, and not in witness protection. She tilted her glass in a small, ironic salute. "Elena, just be careful. And for God's sake, don't fall in love with him." "I'm not," Elena laughed, and it was a real laugh, surprised out of her. "I've met him 5 times. He calls me Vasquez and tells me not to be late." "He called you by your last name." Something shifted in Mara's expression. "He called Chiara Ms. Ritchie for 6 weeks. He called the one before her Ms. Ferretti for 3 weeks, and then—" She stopped. "And then what?" "And then he started calling her by her first name, and 2 months later she was in love with him." Mara set her glass down with finality. "Last names are professional distance. He's keeping distance." "That's fine," Elena said. "I'm keeping distance too. I know you are. Just make sure you both keep it." She took the metro home and stood in her kitchen, making pasta and thinking. She thought about the information and what to do with it. She was practical about information. She collected it not for its own sake, but for the shape it gave to situations. The shape of this situation was, she was working for a man who was powerful in ways she hadn't understood. More powerful and more dangerous than the title of director suggested. She was on a floor where people kept secrets the way other people kept furniture, as the fundamental structure of the space. She had 2 options. She could resign on Monday. She could compose a polite letter tonight and hand it in first thing. Or she could stay. Because the money was real. Because she was competent and she knew it. Because she was, she admitted to herself, standing at her stove with a wooden spoon in her hand, more interested than she was afraid. She had always been more interested than afraid. It was a quality that had served her well. It was also a quality that had, on occasion, gotten her into considerable trouble. She stirred the pasta. She would stay. The first time she saw what he actually was, it was 11:30 on a Tuesday night in her 5th week. She'd stayed late because she'd been reorganizing the archival filing system, a project she'd started because the existing system was a maze of inconsistent logic that made her personally anxious, and had lost track of time in the way she sometimes did when she was doing work that engaged the organizing part of her brain. She heard voices in the corridor. She stayed still. Not hiding, that wasn't the right word. Simply not announcing herself. 2 men. Their voices were low but audible through the glass of her office wall. Not angry, something sharper than angry. The controlled intensity of people discussing something serious without raising their voices. She recognized Dante's voice. The other voice she didn't know. She heard clearly. "The shipment was intercepted. We have a problem with the Genoa operation." She heard Dante. "How big a problem?" "3 containers. The magistrate's office is involved." A silence. Then, quietly, "Handle it." And then, in the same quiet tone, but with a texture that she'd never heard before in 5 weeks, something that was not heat exactly, but the absolute cold underneath heat. "And find out who talked." She sat very still at her desk. She heard footsteps. Then the sound of the elevator. Then silence. She waited 5 minutes. Then she packed up her things with deliberate, unhurried movements, turned off her computer, and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. The elevator doors opened. Dante was standing inside. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Working late?" he said. It was not a question. "Archival reorganization," she said. "I lost track of time." She stepped into the elevator. She stood at the appropriate distance and faced the doors. He said nothing. She said nothing. The elevator descended. She watched the floor numbers. On the 19th floor, he said, "What did you hear?" She didn't hesitate. Hesitation, she'd learned, was a tell. Enough to know it wasn't a conversation about quarterly projections. Another silence. 2 floors. "And?" he said. "And nothing." She kept her voice even, factual, a person relaying accurate data. "I work for you. That means what I hear in your building stays in your building. It's not complicated." He was looking at the side of her face. She could feel it in the particular way that she'd begun to become aware of his attention, as a kind of temperature, a warmth that had no visible source. "Most people," he said carefully, "would be afraid right now." "I know," she said. "You're not." "I'm practical," she said. "Fear isn't useful in elevators." The lobby arrived. The doors opened. She walked out into the lobby, marble and subdued lighting at this hour, the security guard at his desk, the sound of Milan at night beyond the glass, and she walked toward the main exit. "Vasquez." She turned. He was standing at the elevator, one hand on the frame, the other in his pocket. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to learn, the one where the thought was happening somewhere she couldn't see. "Take a car," he said. "It's late." "I'll take the metro," she said. "There's a car available." Not quite an order, something adjacent. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the conversation she'd heard. She thought about Mara's warning. She thought about the scar on his left hand and the 8 names on the index card and the files labelled with names of companies that didn't appear in any corporate registry. She thought about how she was more interested than afraid. "Thank you," she said. "I'll take the car." She took the car. It was black and very clean, driven by a man named Lorenzo who didn't speak beyond confirming her address. She sat in the back and watched Milan go by through the windows. The fog had lifted, and the city at midnight was very beautiful, all pale stone and amber light and the dark ribbons of the canals. She was aware of something she hadn't expected to be aware of, a feeling she couldn't name with professional language, a feeling that had to do with standing in an elevator at 11:30 at night with a man who was, by any reasonable measure, dangerous, and finding that the primary sensation was not fear. She put this in the same file as the feeling from her first Friday, the file labelled "Examine Later." She was accumulating things in that file. When she got home, she made tea and sat at her kitchen table and was honest with herself in the way she tried to be when she was alone. She was honest about the fact that the conversation she'd heard in the corridor, the Genoa operation, the intercepted shipment, find out who talked, should have frightened her. That a reasonable person would have been frightened. She'd been, instead, acutely, uncomfortably alive. She thought about his voice saying those words, "Find out who talked." the temperature of it, the complete absence of doubt or hesitation, the weight of a man who had already decided what would happen next and was simply communicating the outcome. She'd been working for him for 5 weeks. She'd sat across from him every morning for the summary review, stood at the precisely calibrated 2.5 arm lengths distance when he read documents, anticipated his questions and answered them preemptively, warmed the espresso cup every morning without exception. She knew the rhythms of his day. She knew that he was in a better calibration of mood after his second espresso and before the midday calls, when he was most likely to resolve rather than escalate. She knew that he ate his lunch in approximately 12 minutes, that he didn't waste words, that he was incapable of a gesture that wasn't intentional. She knew the shape of him. She did not know him. She drank her tea. She would figure it out. She always did. It happened in the 7th week. He was in the middle of a call she hadn't transferred, a caller who'd used one of the 8 names as a pass-through, which she now understood was occasionally a tactic rather than a legitimate connection. She'd transferred it because the name had checked out. 20 minutes later, she understood the call was not going well. She could hear the tone of it through the closed office door. Not words, the office was well soundproofed, but the rhythm, controlled anger, the kind that was more unsettling than raised voices. When the call ended, he appeared in the doorway of her office. She looked up. His expression was the one she'd come to think of as 0 Kelvin, the absolute stillness that came, she'd learned, not from the absence of feeling, but from its opposite. An emotion so tightly controlled that it ceased to have temperature. "The next call from that number goes to voicemail," he said. "Understood." She made the notation. "Which name should I flag as all of them?" He said it flatly. "Every name associated with that number. If you need the list, I have it." She'd compiled a contact association database in week 3. He'd never mentioned it. She hadn't expected him to. "I'll cross-reference and flag today." He looked at her. In the 7 weeks she'd worked for him, she'd become increasingly precise about reading what was in his silences. This one was something that isn't quite gratitude, but is in that territory. "Elena," he said. She'd been looking back at her monitor, already beginning the cross-referencing. She looked up again. He said nothing else. He said just her name, just Elena, in the way a person says a word when they're testing whether it fits, or when they've already decided it does. "Yes," she said. "Make the notations." He turned and went back into his office. She sat for a moment after the door closed. She was methodical about the emotions she allowed at her desk. She'd learned early that feelings were most useful when they were allowed their proper time and then filed until that time was available. She flagged the contacts. She updated the database. She sent the update to Enzo's inbox. Then she sat back and acknowledged privately that something had changed. He'd called her Vasquez for 7 weeks. It was professional distance. Mara had said so. She'd agreed with the assessment. And now, in the doorway of her office, in the middle of a difficult afternoon, for no apparent reason, he'd said her name. She filed the information. She did not let herself think about it until she was home that evening. And then she did think about it, standing in her kitchen, and what she thought was, "This is not a line I was planning to walk." She'd been around powerful men. Chicago had its share, aldermen with their orbits of lesser power, finance men who moved through rooms with the practiced ease of the genuinely wealthy. She knew how to be competent and professional and invisible in the way that good support staff learned to be invisible. Present, but not present. necessary but not visible. With Dante Conti, she was visible. She'd been visible from the first day, from the moment he'd stopped in the corridor and found her through the glass. She wasn't sure if this was her fault or his, probably both. She thought, this is a complication I don't need. She thought, I am not Chiara. I will not become attached. She thought, he said my name like he'd been deciding whether to. She poured a glass of wine and called her mother in Chicago, who asked how Italy was going and whether she'd found a nice Italian man yet. And Elena said Italy was fine and men were a later question. And her mother made the sound she made when she thought Elena was being evasive, which was a specific, tonal sound that 29 years of being Elena's mother had perfected into an instrument. You sound different, her mother said. I'm tired. It's a demanding job. Different isn't tired. Different is... Her mother paused. Is it a person? It's a job, Mum. Elena Marie Vasquez, I have been reading you for 29 years. Good night, Mum. She hung up and drank her wine and looked at the ceiling of her Milan apartment and listened to the city outside. The distant sound of traffic, the occasional human voices in the street below, the city breathing. She thought about the way he'd said her name. Elena, 2 syllables, nothing special, a common name in both Italian and Spanish, which she'd been told when she arrived in Milan meant she would never be mispronounced. A small but real comfort in a foreign city. He'd said it as if it meant something specific to him, as if it were a decision. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought, be careful. Be very, very careful. She was careful. She was also, she admitted in the dark, already past the point where careful was the right word. She just hadn't admitted that out loud yet. The invitation arrived on her desk in week 9. It was for the Conti Foundation Annual Gala, a charity event of the kind that served the dual purpose of genuine philanthropy and public visibility. She knew about the gala. She'd been coordinating the logistics for 3 weeks: venue confirmations, guest list management, catering coordination, the small and meticulous army of tasks that preceded a large event. She hadn't expected to be invited. She'd assumed her role was coordination. The invitation, printed on the same heavy cream stock as the letter that had promoted her, said her name in calligraphic script. Elena Vasquez, plus guest. Enzo, when she showed it to him, looked unsurprised. He always invites his secretary, he said carefully. All 7 of them? A pause. It's professional courtesy. You've been instrumental in the coordination. It's appropriate for you to attend. She ordered a dress. She'd been to black tie events before. Chicago had its share of galas, though nothing quite at this scale. And she had the practical approach to dressing for occasions that came from being a woman who cared more about function than fashion. She wanted to be dressed correctly, comfortable, and unremarkable. The sales assistant at the boutique on Via della Spiga showed her 3 dresses. 2 were black, 1 was midnight blue. She bought the midnight blue. She wasn't sure why, later. It was deeper and more noticeable than black, which ran counter to her instinct for professional invisibility. She bought it anyway, with the particular certainty of a woman who has seen something she wants and is being honest about it. The gala was at a palazzo in the historic centre. She arrived by cab at 8:15, early enough to be useful for any last-minute coordination, late enough not to seem anxious. The palazzo was lit from the outside, the stone face of it golden against the January night, and the crowd arriving was the kind of crowd that wore wealth with the ease of people who'd never considered alternatives. She gave her name to the attendant, accepted a glass of Prosecco, and moved through the room. It was, she admitted, extraordinary. The palazzo's interior was 18th century restored, frescoed ceilings, marble floors, the particular smell of old stone and expensive flowers. The guest list was the map of northern Italian business and society, dressed in things that cost more than her apartment. She was talking to a man from the Foundation's board, a genuinely pleasant conversation about the Foundation's education initiatives in Calabria, when she felt it. The temperature change, the specific warmth that had no visible source. She turned, mid-sentence, and found him across the room. He was watching her. Not subtly, not with the oblique attention of a man trying to seem like he isn't looking. Directly, with the same unerring precision she'd learned to expect, as if his attention were a physical thing and he'd pointed it at her deliberately. He was in black tie, which should not have been surprising. It was a black tie event, and yet she was unprepared for what black tie did to the architecture of him. He was across a crowded room, and she was aware of him with a specificity that she'd been carefully not being aware of for 9 weeks. She excused herself from the board member. She moved toward the far side of the room. She was not running away, she was being strategic. She was also running away, she admitted to herself, just slightly. He appeared at her side 12 minutes later. He didn't approach her across the room in any conspicuous way. He simply, at a certain point, was there. She'd noticed this quality in him before, the ability to cross a space without appearing to have crossed it. "You bought a new dress," he said. It was a statement rather than a compliment, though it sat somewhere between the two. "It's a gala," she said. "It seemed appropriate." Blue. He was looking at the room, not at her, which she'd learned was sometimes the mode in which he said the more significant things. "Midnight blue," she said. "It suits you." She held very still. She had an instinct, the way she had instincts about information and about people, an instinct that said, "This is a threshold, and you are standing on it." The instinct said, "The way you respond in the next 5 seconds will determine something important." "Thank you," she said, cleanly, without weight. He turned his head then, just enough to look at her. In the gala light, warm and golden and designed to make everyone look better than they did in daylight, his eyes were very dark and very direct. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked. "I've been talking to the Foundation board about the Calabria initiative," she said. "I think the educational outreach component could be expanded. There are some models from similar American programs that Elena—" She stopped. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he said again, slower, with the particular emphasis of a man who is asking a different question than the one the words suggest. She looked at him, at the extraordinary face of him in the palazzo light, at the dark eyes with their specific directness. "Yes," she said honestly, "I am." Something happened in his expression, the barest softening, not warmth exactly, because she was still not sure he did warmth, but a yielding of some fraction of the distance he normally maintained. He held out his hand. "Dance with me." It was not a question. She should have said no. She was his secretary. He was her employer. There was a professional relationship to maintain, and a line she'd been careful about for 9 weeks, and a file full of things she hadn't examined yet, and Mara's voice saying, "Don't fall in love with him." She put her hand in his. He was a very good dancer, of course he was. He led with the same quality he brought to everything, complete assurance, no wasted motion, a clarity of intention that made it easy to follow. She was a decent dancer herself, and they found a rhythm almost immediately, which was either the fault of the music or of something else entirely. "You've worked for me for 9 weeks," he said, close enough that she could hear him over the music without him raising his voice. "I know, I have good calendar awareness. And you're still here. You sound surprised." "I am," he said simply, as if this were an unremarkable thing to admit. She thought, this is the threshold. She thought, don't step over it. Don't. "I'm still here because the work is interesting," she said carefully, "and because I'm good at it." "Both of those things are true," he said. "That isn't why I'm surprised." She looked up at him from the distance of a dance, this close. Then why? He looked at her for a moment with the expression she still couldn't fully decode, the one that had a thought in it she couldn't read. "Because you don't seem afraid of me," he said. "Should I be?" The song shifted. He didn't let go of her hand. "Most people," he said quietly, "have the good sense to be at least a little afraid." "I'm not most people," she said. "No," he said, "you're not." They danced for a second song. He didn't say anything else, she didn't either, and when the second song ended, she stepped back and she nodded, and she went to find the Foundation board member and resumed the conversation about Calabria, and she was professional and calm and competent for the rest of the evening, but her heart was doing something she'd need to deal with later. Later. She heard the gunshot on a Thursday in week 11. This is what she'd say afterward, if she ever said anything. She heard it. One shot from somewhere below, muffled by the building's bones. The building was 42 floors. Sound didn't travel that way. She couldn't have heard it. But she heard something, a flat, percussive sound that her body understood before her mind did, because the body has its own archive of danger. The 42nd floor changed immediately. In the way that pressurized systems change when something fails, the same room, the same air, but a different configuration. Enzo was on his phone within 30 seconds. 2 men she'd seen on the floor before, but whose roles she'd never determined, appeared from a stairwell door. She stayed at her desk. She finished the document she was editing. She did this deliberately, because she was aware that what she did in the next 10 minutes would be seen and would mean something. Dante came out of his office. He looked at her desk with the expression of a man taking inventory, and when he saw her, sitting, working, composed, something moved in his face. He came to her door. "Go home," he said. "I have 3 documents outstanding." "They'll wait." His voice was different, not cold, something stripped of the professional distance, the temperature of a man talking directly, without calculation. "Go home, Elena." The second use of her first name, she noted it. "Is everyone all right?" she asked. A beat. "Yes." "Then—" She looked at her monitor, looked at him, made the assessment she made about all information. What was the most useful thing to do with it? "I can stay and be useful, or I can go home and be useless. Which do you prefer?" The silence was different from the others. She'd been cataloguing his silences for 11 weeks, and this one was one she hadn't encountered before. "Go home," he said. "I'll call you." She went. She took the elevator down. The lobby was normal, or performing normal, the security guard at his desk, nothing visibly different. And she walked out into a cold February afternoon and stood on the pavement for a moment. She took the metro because she needed to think, and thinking happened better when she was moving. She thought someone was shot. In the building, below, or near it, in the orbit of Dante Conti's world, which was her world now. 9 to 6, Monday to Friday, plus the occasional Thursday night when she lost track of time doing archival work. She thought about Mara's words. People are afraid of him. Not in a difficult boss way, in a real way. She thought about the look on his face when he'd come to her door and found her sitting at her desk, working. She thought, he looked at me like I was... She didn't finish the thought. She filed it. He called at 7. She was eating dinner. "Are you home?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." A pause. "I want to explain—" "You don't need to explain anything," she said. "I work for you. I understand that certain aspects of the business are Elena." He said her name in the way that stopped her. "I'm calling to make sure you're all right." She set down her fork. In 11 weeks, in 9 to 6 days and the occasional evening, in summary meetings and calendar reviews and espresso cups and index cards with 8 names, in all of that, he had not once called to ask if she was all right. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm having dinner." "What are you making?" She looked at her bowl of pasta. She thought about the absurdity of this conversation. Dante Conti, who ran companies legitimate and otherwise, who said, "Find out who talked," in the tone of a man giving the weather, calling her to ask about dinner. "Cacio e pepe," she said. A pause. Something in the silence had a texture she couldn't name. "Is it good?" "It's very good. I've been working on the ratio." "The ratio?" "Pasta water to cheese. It's technical." Something happened on his end of the line, a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, the ghost of one. "I'll see you Monday," he said. "I'll be there," she said. He hung up. She sat and looked at her pasta and thought about the ghost of a laugh and the 7-11 minutes of his voice asking after her dinner, and thought, this is a line I have crossed. She wasn't sure when exactly. She thought it might have been the dance at the gala. She thought it might have been earlier. She thought it might have been the first moment she'd looked at him through the glass and held his gaze and nodded, professional and unafraid. She ate her pasta. It was, objectively, very good. She had the ratio right. She thought, I'm in trouble. She thought, I've been in trouble before. She picked up her wine and looked out the window at the Milanese night. He appeared on a Tuesday in week 13, Marco Bellini. He came to the 42nd floor on a visitor's pass, escorted by one of the lower floor managers, who left him at the reception desk with the slight awkwardness of someone who wasn't sure of the protocol. Elena had met him in the lobby, standard visitor arrival procedure, and brought him up. He was 32, Milanese, the kind of handsome that was easy rather than striking. He worked for one of the Foundation's partner organizations, educational non-profits, the Calabria Initiative, she discussed with the board member at the gala. He had good energy and a genuine interest in the work, and a way of looking at her that she registered with the peripheral awareness she maintained for such things. She showed him to the conference room, offered coffee, confirmed the meeting time with Dante's calendar. Professional. Efficient. Unremarkable. Except that Dante arrived at the conference room 7 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Unprecedented. He was never early. And he was standing in the corridor outside when she was talking to Marco, who was making a joke about something she'd said, and she'd laughed. She heard the door open. She looked up. Dante was looking at Marco Bellini with an expression she'd never seen before. It was still the 0 Kelvin stillness, but the specific quality of the stillness was different, like the difference between a still lake and a still lake right before a storm. "Mr. Bellini," he said. "Mr. Conti." Marco stood quickly, the instinctive response to the specific gravity of Dante's presence. "Thank you for making time. Elena." He said her name, and his gaze moved to her, and in the look there was something layered, something that was the professional acknowledgement of an assistant, and something else entirely underneath it, like a message in another language. "I was just showing this to Bellini to the conference room," she said evenly. "I see that." He held the door open. "Marco, shall we?" Marco went. Dante followed. He paused in the doorway. "Elena." Again. Third time with her first name, and this one was different. Lighter, she thought, than the others, as if he were reminding her of something. "I'll bring the presentation materials," she said. She brought the materials. She set them up efficiently and left. She did not look at Marco Bellini again for the rest of his visit. She was finishing the afternoon's correspondence when Dante appeared in her doorway. "The Bellini meeting," he said. "Productive? The foundation partnership will proceed." A pause. "He asked about you." She looked up. "Professionally?" A beat. "Personally?" She held his gaze. She was aware, intensely, of the particular charged quality that the air in her office doorway had developed in the past 3 months. The charge that happened when he stood there, which was not the charge that was present when anyone else stood there. "And," she said, "and I told him you were my personal secretary and that your schedule was demanding." His voice was absolutely even. "I did not give him your contact information." She looked at him for a moment. "That wasn't your information to give," she said, "or to withhold." The 0 Kelvin expression fractured, barely, by millimeters, into something she couldn't quite name. "No," he said, "it wasn't." He left. She sat at her desk and looked at the space where he'd been standing. She thought about the way he'd arrived at the conference room 7 minutes early. She thought about the specific quality of his stillness when he'd seen Marco laughing with her. She thought about, "I did not give him your contact information." She thought about all the things she'd been filing for later examination, the accumulation of weeks. She thought, "This is a man who doesn't know what to do with what he feels, or who knows exactly what to do with it and is deciding whether to." She thought, "I am in very significant trouble." She thought, "The problem is, I think I'm fine with that." She found it in week 15, not by accident, by the particular methodical, slightly obsessive organising impulse that had made her good at this job, and that was, she understood now, both a strength and a liability. She was completing the archival reorganisation she'd started in week 5. The system was nearly perfect now, cross-referenced, digitised where possible, physical files organised by a logic that was both chronological and categorical, the way her brain organised most things. She'd been through hundreds of documents. Most were legitimate, the genuine corporate records of a substantial, complex company. Some she'd learned to recognise as the other thing, the paper architecture of ventures that didn't appear in the annual report. She recognised them now. She hadn't in the beginning. But 15 weeks of exposure had given her eyes that could see the difference between a legitimate logistics contract and something that was using the language of logistics to mean something else. The Ferrara account wasn't in the main archive. It was in a separate physical file, older than the others, the folder worn at the edges, the kind of file that had been touched many times over many years. She found it in the back of a cabinet she was reorganizing, behind a divider marked with a tab that said only F, in handwriting she recognized as Dante's. She shouldn't have opened it. She knew that. She opened it. The documents inside were in 3 languages: Italian, Sicilian dialect, and a third that she recognized as Calabrian, and they predated the current company by 20 years. She read enough to understand the shape of what she was looking at, the foundation documents of the original family enterprise, the real one. The one that existed before Aldo Conti decided to build a legitimate company on top of it. She read names she recognized, names from Enzo's voice on the day she'd asked about the 7 secretaries. The 5th secretary discovered things she shouldn't have discovered. She understood, now, why those things had mattered. She sat on the archive room floor. The archive room was in the basement, a windowless space she'd been working in for 3 weeks, and she held the file and she thought. She thought about the 5th secretary. She thought about Mara's voice. Plausible deniability is what keeps people like us safe. She thought about Enzo. Loyalty requires knowing what you're being loyal to. She thought, I know now. I couldn't unknow it if I tried. She thought, what do I do with this? She put the file back exactly where she'd found it. She took a photograph of exactly 2 documents, enough to understand what it was, not enough to be in possession of something damning. And then she deleted the photographs from her phone, because this was not information she wanted to carry around, and because possession of it wouldn't help her. She finished the archival work. She went upstairs. She knocked on the frame of the open office door. He was on a call. He held up one finger. Wait. And she waited. She was patient. She'd been patient for 15 weeks. She could be patient for 3 more minutes. He ended the call. I've finished the archival reorganization, she said. He nodded. He was watching her with the same precision he always watched her, and she had the particular feeling she sometimes had, that he could see more than she intended to show. You found it, he said. She didn't flinch. She'd expected this, not the specific words, but the specific moment. The moment when he saw that she'd seen. He was, she'd learned, exceptionally good at reading people. It was part of why he was dangerous. Yes, she said. The silence was long. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Milan was grey and wintry, the Alps invisible behind clouds. And, he said, and I put it back where I found it. She met his eyes. And I'm not going to talk about it. And I'm not going to leave. The look he gave her then was, she searched for the word and found only approximations. Piercing. Searching. The look of a man trying to understand something that doesn't follow his established patterns. Why not? He said. She thought about how to answer that. She thought about all the things in the file labelled "Examine Later." The name said like a decision. The dance at the gala. The phone call about Cacio e Pepe. The 7 minutes early to the conference room. The way he'd said, I did not give him your contact information, with the specific neutrality of a man feeling something he wasn't going to name. She thought about what was true. Because some things are more important than the smart thing to do, she said. He stood. He came around the desk, a thing he rarely did. He was a man who functioned best with the desk between himself and other people, she'd noticed, and he stood in the middle of his office and looked at her. They were 6 feet apart. The distance felt charged, like the air before lightning. Elena, he said. Her name, the 4th time with her first name, and this time it had weight. Dante, she said. It was the first time she'd used his name. She watched it land. Something in his expression shifted. Not the 0 Kelvin stillness, but something underneath it, the thing the stillness was covering. Something that had been waiting. This is not a safe life, he said. The life around me. I know that, she said. You should be afraid. You keep telling me that. Because it's true. A pause. Because I need you to understand what this is before... He stopped. Before what? She said. He looked at her. The room was very quiet. The city went on outside. Before anything, he said. And the way he said it, the weight of it, the restraint of it, the something under the restraint, told her more than any direct statement could have. She nodded, once. The nod of a woman who has received information and is filing it correctly. I'll see you tomorrow, she said. She went home. She sat in her apartment and looked at the ceiling and thought, the thing I've been filing for later, it's ready to be examined. She thought, I am in love with Dante Conti. She thought, well, here we are. She poured the wine. She let herself look at it. He invited her to dinner on a Friday in week 17. Not to a restaurant, to his apartment. The invitation came in the form of a note, handwritten on the same heavy cream stock as everything else on the 42nd floor, left on her desk at 5 o'clock. She found it when she came back from the filing room, picked it up, and read it, standing at her desk. Elena, Friday evening, 8 o'clock. My address is enclosed. This is not a work obligation. Come only if you want to. Beneath it, in the same careful handwriting, a Via Monte Napoleone address she recognized as one of the most prestigious residential streets in the city. She stood holding the note for a long moment. She thought about the past 17 weeks, about the accumulation of small things that she'd been cataloguing and filing and refusing to examine until they were ready. She thought about the file that was now ready. She thought about the specific quality of his attention, unerring, continuous, the kind that didn't require proximity because it seemed to exist as a fact of the world regardless of physical distance. She thought about the way he'd said before anything with the restraint of a man holding something back, and how the restraint itself was more revealing than anything he might have said. She thought, come only if you want to. She thought, I want to. She texted Mara. He invited me to his apartment for dinner. Mara's response was, oh God. Then, are you going? She typed back, yes. 3 minutes of silence. Then, okay, text me when you're there. Text me when you're leaving. Text me when you're home. Please. She dressed carefully on Friday. Not the navy blazer. That was daytime armor, professional carapace. She wore a black dress that was simple and correct, and that she'd bought in her first month in Milan when she'd been trying to dress like someone who belonged here. Heeled boots, her hair down, which she almost never wore at work. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She thought, "You are about to walk into the apartment of a man who runs a mafia family and who has been saying your name with increasing intentionality for 10 weeks. She thought, "Yes. And?" She took a cab. The building was exactly what she'd expected, and somehow still more than she'd expected. The kind of residential building that existed in Milan as an assertion of a different order of wealth. No signage, a door that required a code plus a biometric scan, a lobby with one piece of sculpture and very good lighting. The elevator required a separate floor code. She entered the number he'd included below the address. She committed codes to memory by instinct now, a reflex she'd developed working on the 42nd floor, and the elevator took her up. It opened into the apartment itself, not into a corridor, directly into the space. She understood then what the word penthouse meant when money was not a limiting factor. It meant 4 floors compressed into one, height and volume and glass and stone, the kind of space that made you aware of the sky as something that had been invited inside. The view was all of Milan, every direction. The Duomo, small and perfect from this height. The grid of lights, the dark distance where the city gave way to fog, and then, somewhere beyond the fog, to mountains. He was standing at the kitchen island. He was not in a suit. She had only ever seen him in a suit. He was wearing dark trousers and a grey shirt, open at the collar, sleeves rolled to the forearm. The scar on his left hand was visible. He looked different without the suit, not softer. She understood now that he was constitutionally incapable of soft, but more immediate, more there. "You came," he said. "You said to come if I wanted to," she said. "I wanted to." Something moved in his expression. He looked at her in the way he had of looking at her, the direct, unerring attention, and she felt it the way she always felt it, like a hand being laid flat against her sternum. "Sit," he said. "I'm cooking." She sat at the kitchen island and watched him cook. He moved in the kitchen with the same quality he brought to everything: efficiency, precision, no wasted motion. He was making something with pasta and a sauce that smelled of tomato and basil and something else she couldn't name. "You cook," she said. "My mother cooked," he said. She was from Palermo. In her house, a man who couldn't cook was an embarrassment. It was the first personal thing he'd told her. In 17 weeks, this was the first sentence about his life that wasn't the shape of his professional self. "Was?" she said. A pause. He stirred the sauce. "She died when I was 22. I'm sorry." He nodded once. The nod of a man who has received condolence many times and accepted it in the manner of someone accepting a thing that cannot be changed. "Your father built the company," she said. "My father built everything." He said it in a tone that had complicated things in it, pride and something harder. "And then he handed it to me and died before I was ready." "Were you ever ready?" He looked at her across the kitchen island. No, but that wasn't the question. She picked up the wine he'd poured without asking. He'd known she drank wine, had observed it, had chosen something Sicilian that she would learn later was from a vineyard that had been in his family for 3 generations, and looked at the view. "What question was it?" she asked. "Whether I was capable." He returned his attention to the pan. "Whether I could hold what he built, carry it." "And I've held it for 5 years." He said it without pride, as a fact. "I know," she said. He looked at her again. You've read about it. I've worked for you for 17 weeks, she said. I read everything available. And what did you conclude? She thought about how to say it honestly without being either flattering or aggressive. She said, that you're very good at what you do, both versions of it, and that both versions of it have cost you something. The silence that followed was longer than most of his silences. What do you think it's cost me? He said. People, she said. The kind of people who stay. He set down the spoon. He looked at her across the kitchen island, and in the light of his apartment, warm, private, nothing like the offices and conference rooms where she'd learned the shape of him, he looked like a man who was standing at the edge of something. You're still here, he said. I'm still here, she agreed. They ate at the table by the window. The food was excellent. He cooked the way he did everything, with total competence and no need for acknowledgement. They talked for 3 hours. She learned that he'd studied in London, that he'd hated it in the specific way of someone who misses their city, that he'd come back to Milan at 24, knowing what was waiting for him, and having made his peace with it. He learned that she'd grown up in a house full of books, that her father had been a music teacher, that she'd come to Italy because she'd looked at a map once and thought, I want to go somewhere that's older than anything I know. He asked why Milan, not Rome, not Florence. She said, because Milan doesn't perform. It just is. He'd looked at her for a long moment and said, that's exactly right. At 11, she looked at the time. I should go, she said. You don't have to, he said. Then, immediately, I have a guest room. She looked at him. He was looking back with the expression that had something waiting in it. Not pressure, not demand, simply a thing that was available, offered without agenda, and that she could take or leave. She thought, I could leave. I should probably leave. Okay, she said. I'll stay. She slept in the guest room, which was the size of a small suite, and she lay in the dark and listened to the sound of Milan 40 floors below, and thought, something has changed. Not slightly, fundamentally. She thought, this is the beginning of something I can't control. She thought, I'm not sure I want to control it. The next Tuesday, she noticed them. She'd been aware, peripherally, of a kind of security apparatus around Dante's daily life. The cars, the occasional presence of men whose roles were unclear, the way the building's security shifted slightly when he was in it. She'd registered this the way she registered most structural elements of her environment, as data, present, but not urgent. On Tuesday of week 18, she was coming back from lunch when she noticed the black car parked across from the office building's main entrance. It had been there Monday too. She registered it on Monday as nothing, because black cars in Milan were common, especially in the business district. On Tuesday, she registered it as the same car because she had the detail memory of someone who'd spent her adult life paying attention. On Wednesday, a different car. Same position, different plate. But the man behind the wheel, she got a look at him briefly as she walked past, had the specific stillness of someone who was watching rather than waiting. She went upstairs and brought the espresso to Dante at 9:15 as usual, and she set it down on his desk and she said, there have been cars watching the building. He didn't react visibly. The absence of reaction told her everything. He'd known. I know, he said. Is this something I should be worried about? She asked. She kept her voice even, factual. He looked at her for a moment. Are you worried? I'm asking. He picked up the espresso. There are people who would prefer I was less operational than I am. They express this preference through various means. He said it in the tone he used for operational information. Factual, neutral, stripped of urgency. We're aware of the surveillance. It's being addressed. Addressed how? A pause. The specific pause of a man deciding how much to give. Diplomatically, he said. Then, go back to work, Elena. She went back to work, but she began from that week to pay a different kind of attention. She started to see the structure she'd been inside without understanding. The men who came to the 42nd floor at unusual hours weren't just associates or partners. They were something more organized than that. They came in specific patterns. Certain men on certain days. Always the same small core who were different from the larger outer circle. The conversations she overheard, carefully, never intending to, simply present in the space, had the particular register of reports, of men accounting to a man whose account they needed. She understood now what Enzo had meant by the family, in the broadest sense. And she understood something else. That in this structure, she had a position. Not just as secretary, as something more specific, more significant. She occupied the innermost administrative ring, the woman who managed his calendar, his correspondence, his access, who knew the 8 names, who had been in the archive room and found the Ferrara file and put it back, who had slept in his guest room and eaten breakfast at his kitchen island on Saturday morning. He'd made coffee, she'd made toast. They'd read different sections of Corriere della Sera in comfortable silence, and gone home with the particular feeling of a person who has been given a glimpse of something they are going to want to return to. She knew what her position was now in the structure of his world. She was trusted. More trusted, she suspected, than most people who had known him for years. She wasn't sure if that was something she'd earned or something he'd decided. She asked him that Friday. They were in his office at the end of the day, the summary review that had become less a business exercise and more a conversation with business in it. "Why did you trust me with the archive?" she said. He looked up from the page. "I didn't give you the archive with the expectation you'd find it. But you knew I would." A pause. "I thought you might." "And you didn't move it." He set down the page. He looked at her with the expression that had the thing behind it, the thing she could see the outline of now, even if she couldn't see the thing itself. "No, I didn't move it." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. He turned the espresso cup, a habit, the quarter turn, which she knew now as a tell for a thought being chosen carefully. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do." A test. An understanding, he met her eyes, of what kind of person I had in front of me. And you put it back, he said, and you came to me directly, and you told me you weren't leaving. She nodded, slowly. "You could have just asked me." "I could have," he said. "People perform for direct questions. I needed to see the real thing." She thought about that, about the quality of the test, not cruel, not entrapment, but the particular intelligence of someone who understood that character revealed itself through behaviour, not declaration. "Was there ever a version," she said carefully, "where I found it, and something bad happened to me?" The silence was exactly the length of a breath. "No," he said. And she believed him, not because she was naive, but because she'd spent 17 weeks learning his tells, and this wasn't one. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. She stood to leave. He stood too, which he did sometimes now, a small change she'd noticed, the standing when she left. She didn't know what it meant. She thought it might mean something. At the door, she said, "The men watching the building." "Handled," he said. She nodded. She left. In the elevator, she thought about what he'd said, an understanding of what kind of person I had in front of me. She thought about how long she'd been understood and hadn't known she was being examined. She thought about how she hadn't minded once she knew. She thought, he is a man who has been alone in the specific way of people who cannot find anyone they trust enough not to be alone with. She thought, I understand that. I know that country. She thought, we are going to be very bad for each other's self-preservation and very good for each other in every other way. She took the metro home. It happened without a prologue. Week 20, a Thursday. The day had been difficult. A deal that had been in negotiation for 6 weeks collapsed suddenly, with the particular violence of things that have been held together by one person's will and then aren't. She'd seen him absorb it across 3 phone calls, each one shorter and colder than the last. She'd cleared his afternoon without being asked. She'd brought the second espresso at 2 o'clock. This was not in the protocol. The second espresso was not usually at 2, and set it on his desk and stepped back. He'd looked at it, looked at her. "You can go," he said. "I know. I'm staying." He'd said nothing. He'd drunk the espresso. She'd gone back to her desk and worked. At 6 o'clock, the floor had emptied. Enzo left at 5:30, the assistants at 5. By 6 it was her and Dante and the view of Milan going amber in the early evening. She was shutting down her computer when she heard him in the corridor. She looked up. He was standing in her doorway. He was holding his jacket. He'd taken it off at some point in the afternoon, and his shirt was open 2 buttons from the collar, and he looked for the first time in 20 weeks like a man who was tired. Not exhausted. Tired in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something for a long time. She said, "Come in." He came in. He sat in the chair across from her desk, the visitor's chair, which had been occupied by many people in 20 weeks and had never, until this moment, been occupied by him. "I'm sorry about the Ferrara deal," she said. The Ferrara deal was 6 years of work. He said it flat, informational. 6 years of managing competing interests and building trust, and he stopped. "And it fell apart in a phone call," she said. "In a phone call." She looked at him, at the tired quality of him in her visitor's chair. She thought about all the things she knew about him now, the Palermo mother and the dead father, and the London years, and the Saturday mornings at his kitchen island, and the specific way he said her name. She thought about all the weight of what he carried, the legitimate company and the other one, the family in the broadest sense, the men who watched the building, the 5 years of holding everything his father left him. She thought, I want to do something for him. Not professionally, simply, humanly, as the person who knew him best. She stood up. She walked around the desk. She sat on the edge of the desk, close to where he was sitting, within reach. "You did everything right," she said, "with the Ferrara situation. I watched the whole negotiation from the calendar. You did everything correctly." He looked up at her. From this angle, this close, She could see things she could normally only see one at a time: the dark eyes, and the line of his jaw, and the scar on his left hand, and the mouth that was, at rest, a line of controlled feeling. "Sometimes," she said, "things fall apart anyway." "I know," he said, "and that's not a failure of control, it's just—" She looked for the word. "Entropy." Something happened in his expression. The 0 Kelvin quality shifted, moved, like ice beginning to understand the possibility of water. He reached up. His hand, the left one, the scarred one, touched her face. Just the side of her face, from the jaw to the cheekbone, the gesture of a man who has been deciding whether to do something for a very long time and has finally decided. She went very still. He was looking at her the way he looked at things he was genuinely trying to understand, fully, without calculation, with the complete attention that he usually reserved for documents that required precision. "Elena," he said. "Yes," she said. She wasn't answering a question. She was giving an answer to the question he hadn't asked yet, the question that had been accumulating in her file for 20 weeks, the question that was the whole shape of these 5 months. He kissed her. It was, she would think about this later, sitting in a cab going home, her hand against her own mouth as if to feel the memory of it. It was exactly like him. Deliberate, complete, no hesitation and no performance, just the specific, direct expression of something that had been decided. She kissed him back. His hand moved from her jaw to the back of her neck, and she felt his thumb at the base of her skull, gentle in the way that something very strong can be gentle when it chooses, and she thought, "There it is. There's the thing I've been filing for 20 weeks. He pulled back first. He looked at her. The expression on his face was one she'd never seen before. Open, in the way that a locked room is open when someone finally finds the key. Exposed. Not vulnerable, because she wasn't sure he did vulnerable, but present, in a way that all his professional stillness had carefully prevented. "I've wanted to do that," he said, "since you looked at me through the glass on your first day." "The glass wall," she said. "You stopped. You didn't look away." He held her gaze. "Everyone looks away." "I told you," she said. "I'm not everyone." He stood. He was very close. Close enough that the warmth of him was a physical thing. He looked at her with the expression that was new, open, decided, without the layer of professional control. "This is complicated," he said. "Yes," she said. "You're my secretary. I'm aware. I have enemies, real ones, people who—" He stopped. "The risk to you is not theoretical." She thought about the cars watching the building. She thought about the gunshot she may or may not have heard on a Thursday. She thought about the 5th secretary who'd found things and been let go. She thought about all of it, clearly, without flinching. "I know what I'm choosing," she said. "I know who you are, both versions of you." He looked at her for a long moment. She held the look. She always held the look. "Good," he said quietly, "because I don't think I can—" He stopped again. For a man who was usually so precise with language, these silences were telling. The things he couldn't finish were the things that mattered most. She reached up and put her hand flat against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, which was faster than it usually was. She noted this with the same meticulous attention she brought to all important data. "I know," she said. She took the cab home. She sat in the back and looked at Milan going by in the dark, and felt the particular aliveness of a person who has made a choice that is going to change everything. She texted Mara. Something happened. Mara. Good something or bad something? Her. Both. A pause. Then, oh no. Then, oh yes. She learned gradually what came with him. The first thing was the security. He told her on a Sunday. They'd been having dinner again, his apartment, a habit they'd settled into with the ease of people who had been circling toward a thing and were finally there. That a car would be available to her. Not optional, not an offer. I don't need a car, she said. There are people who know your face now, he said. He said it without drama, without looking at her. He was clearing the table, which he did with the same efficiency he brought to everything, and the very absence of drama made it more real than drama would have. You're with me. That has a visibility. She thought about "you're my" and the pause in it, the word he'd reached for and then redirected. She thought about what that word was. She thought about what "with him" meant in every dimension. A car, she said. Lorenzo, you've met him. He doesn't talk. He doesn't need to. He's very good at what he does. He came back to the table. He sat. He looked at her with the directness that was becoming, she thought, the thing she would miss most if it was ever gone. I need to know you're safe. She looked at him. Is this how it is, with you? Yes, he said. No apology. She thought about the life she'd been living before, the metro, the aperitivo bar, the Sunday markets, the Milan that belonged to her as a regular person moving through it without anyone watching. She thought about the cost of what she was choosing. She thought about the table and the wine and the view and the man across from her who said, I need to know you're safe, in the tone of someone telling her a fact about the physical world. Okay, she said. Lorenzo. The second thing was the family. Not the foundation family, the actual one. The inner circle of the organization that Aldo Conti had built and Dante had inherited. She met them on a Thursday evening when she arrived at the apartment to find 3 men already there. Dante introduced them with first names only. Silvio, the oldest, maybe 50, with the quality of someone who had been standing just behind the main figure for a very long time. Raf, younger, perhaps 30, with quick eyes. Marco, not Marco Bellini, a different Marco, this one built like a door, who looked at her with the specific, assessing look of a man taking inventory. Gentlemen, she said, I'll make coffee. She made coffee with the equipment she'd learned over weeks of Sunday mornings. She brought it out. She set it down. She did not leave the room, because leaving the room would have meant something she didn't intend to mean. Silvio watched her with the expression of a man recalibrating. Dante watched Silvio watching her. Later, after the men had gone, she was washing the cups in the kitchen when Dante came up beside her. Silvio will test you, he said. How? He'll create a situation, ask you something you shouldn't know, or give you information you shouldn't have, or try to determine where your loyalties are. He leaned against the counter. He does this with everyone new. And if I fail the test? A pause. You won't. How do you know? Because I've watched you for 5 months, and I know your character. Simple, categorical. the statement of a man who has gathered his evidence and rendered his verdict. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She turned and looked at him. "I need you to tell me something," she said. "Ask it." "Have you ever—" She thought about how to phrase it honestly. "In your work, the other version of it, have you done things that can't be undone?" He looked at her. The expression was steady, not defensive. He understood the question and was not going to avoid it. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She'd known the answer. She'd known it since the archive room. She'd known it since Enzo said loyalty requires knowing what you're being loyal to. "I'm not going to ask for specifics," she said. "I don't want specifics. But I needed to know you'd tell me the truth." "I will always tell you the truth," he said, "even when it's inconvenient, especially then." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him. The first time she'd initiated this. The first time she'd reached for him rather than accepting his reach. And she felt him hold very still for one surprised second before his arms came around her. They stood in the kitchen for a moment, the city below them, the two of them at the centre of something that had no clear edges yet. "This is complicated," she said into his shoulder. "I know," he said. "I'm staying anyway." His hold tightened by approximately nothing. "Enough." "I know that too," he said. It was a phone call at 2 in the morning. She'd been staying at the penthouse, not every night, but most nights, since the Thursday of the kiss. They'd settled into something that felt like a life. The mornings with coffee and the newspaper, the evenings that were dinner and conversation and silence of the comfortable kind. He worked late, and she adapted to his hours because she was constitutionally suited to the rhythm of someone who needed proximity without demand. The phone rang at 2. He was awake. He slept lightly, she'd noticed, the specific light sleep of someone who'd trained themselves to be available. She heard him answer in the next room, his voice dropping to the register she now recognized as operational. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the silence between the words she couldn't hear. He came in at 2:15. She was sitting up, the lamp on, a book in her lap that she hadn't read. He looked at her. He was already dressed, trousers, shirt, jacket over his arm. "I have to go," he said. "I know." She set down the book. "Is it serious?" "Yes." He was putting on his watch, the movement quick, practiced, a man who'd done this before. "I need you to stay here tonight. Don't go to your apartment. Don't—" He stopped. "Stay here until you hear from me." "What's happened?" He looked at her. The expression was the 0 Kelvin one. But under it, she could see it now. She could read him now in the way she read people. The real thing under the performance. There was something that was afraid. Not for himself. For her. "There's been a move," he said. "Against the organization. I need to respond to it." He sat on the edge of the bed. He put his hands on either side of her face and looked at her with a specificity that made her breath catch. "You're going to stay here. Lorenzo will be in the building. You will not open the door for anyone except me or Silvio." Dante, Elena. Her name, the way he said it now, not the professional distance of Vasquez, not even the decided quality of the early Elenas, but something that had become, without her noticing, her name as he said it when she was the most real thing in his field of vision. "Stay here." "Okay," she said. He kissed her forehead. Once, with the precise deliberateness of someone who understands that some gestures have to carry a great deal. Then he left. She sat in the lit room and listened to the city below, and thought about what it meant to be here. Not just in the penthouse, here, in this life, in the orbit of this man who had kissed her forehead with all the weight of what he couldn't say, and walked out into a 2 a.m. Milan with something serious to handle. She thought about Mara. Be careful. Don't fall in love with him. She thought, I am well past that instruction. She thought, I am in love with him, in the specific way that I am in love with very few things. Not the falling kind, the growing kind, the kind that comes from 5 months of watching and understanding and making a deliberate choice. She made tea. She sat in the kitchen with the view of the sleeping city, and she thought about what she'd accepted. She was clear-eyed about it. She'd been clear-eyed from the beginning, or she'd tried to be. She knew what he was. She knew the weight of the file in the archive room. She knew the cars that had watched the building. She knew that the men who came to the 42nd floor were not attending board meetings. She knew all of it. And she thought, the question is not what he is. The question is who he is. And I know who he is. I know the man who cooked Sicilian pasta because his mother was from Palermo. I know the man who stood up when I left the room, slowly, over weeks, because he'd made a choice about what I meant. I know the man who said, I will always tell you the truth, and meant it in the specific, literal way of someone for whom truth is more important than comfort. She knew him. Both versions. The whole person. She was still sitting in the kitchen when dawn came. He returned at 6:30. He let himself in. He came to the kitchen and he looked at her, sitting there with the cold tea, the first light of Milan coming through the windows. And something happened in his face. You didn't sleep, he said. No. He sat across from her. He was tired. Not the occasional tired she'd seen before, but deep tired, the kind that went into the bones. He had a small cut above his left eyebrow that was already closing. She noted it and chose not to comment on it. Not yet. It's handled, he said. Okay. There were men who... He stopped. People who thought the organisation was vulnerable, who thought they could... Another stop. He looked at her directly. Nobody was killed. I want you to know that. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. But it was close, he said. I know. He reached across the table and took her hand. He held it on the kitchen table between them, the way a person holds a thing that is the most real thing in the room. I have been alone, he said, in the specific way of this life, for a very long time. He said it as if he was reading it from somewhere, as if it were a text he'd been preparing. I'm not... He stopped. His thumb moved over the back of her hand. I don't know how to do this. The normal parts, the domestic parts, the... Dante, she said. He looked at her. You made me coffee on 14 different Sunday mornings, and never once did it wrong, she said. I think you know how. The thing that happened in his expression then, she didn't have a word for it. It was the thing under the thing, the man under all the layers of what he'd had to become. He brought her hand to his mouth and kissed it. She thought, there it is. That's what 5 months of accumulation leads to. That's what it looks like when a man who has held everything at a distance chooses not to. She thought, I'm not afraid. She wasn't. She was exactly where she'd decided to be. The test came on a Tuesday, as Dante had predicted. She was at the office, everything outwardly the same as it had always been, because they'd agreed it should be. The professional relationship remained professionally maintained. She was his secretary. He was her employer. The 42nd floor was exactly what it had always been, and she was exactly who she'd always been in it. Silvio came in at 2:30, with the ease of a man who had been coming to this floor for years, which he had. He stopped at her desk. "Miss Vasquez." He was polite. His face gave nothing. "Silvio." She used the first name deliberately, because she'd assessed that this was the correct register for Silvio, not the formal distance of an outside visitor, not the overreach of presumption, but the earned familiarity of someone who'd been in the apartment when he'd been in the apartment. He looked at her. Something moved in his eyes. "I need to speak with you, privately, if you have a moment." "Of course." She stood. "The conference room?" "I was thinking a coffee," he said.
"Downstairs."
She recognized the meaning of this. Downstairs was neutral territory, not the 42nd floor. He wanted to see how she behaved away from the office, which was a different kind of assessment than observing her in it. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. She sent Dante a message, going for coffee with Silvio, back in an hour, not asking permission, informing. Dante replied, "Understood." She and Silvio sat at a bar 2 blocks from the office building. He ordered espresso. She ordered the same. He began with something indirect, a question about the Foundation Gala in January, whether she'd found the organization's philanthropic work meaningful. She answered honestly, yes, the Calabria initiative in particular had substance. He asked about her background, Chicago, linguistics, how she'd ended up in Milan, how she'd ended up at Conti Enterprises specifically. She answered each question with the same calibration, honest, neither more nor less than asked. Then he set down his cup. "You know what he is," he said. A statement. "Yes," she said, "and you're comfortable with that." "I'm clear-eyed about it," she said, which isn't the same as comfortable, but yes. He looked at her for a moment. "The last woman who was in the position you're in now," he paused, "a woman he cared about some years ago." He said it carefully. "She was put in danger because of what he was, because of his world." She held his gaze. "What happened?" "She left," he said, "because she was afraid. And because he—" Another careful pause. "Because he let her go, rather than ask her to stay. Because he thought it was the safer choice for her." Elena sat with this. She thought about the specific quality of Dante's aloneness, the kind that came from experience, not just circumstance. "He let her go," she said. "He did." Silvio's eyes were steady on hers. "He is not a man who—" He searched for the word. "He does not require from others what he will not give himself. He let her go because he believed she would be safer without him." A pause. He was probably right. "He's wrong about me," she said. Silvio looked at her. "He won't have to let me go," she said, "because I'm not going. And he won't have to protect me from the decision because I made the decision with full information." She held his gaze steadily. "I know exactly what I'm staying for, both versions of it. I'm not going to be frightened off. I'm not going to become inconvenient, and I'm not going to betray him." A pause. Because he is not the most important thing in my life by accident. He is the most important thing in my life because I chose him specifically with everything I knew. Silvio was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know he's going to try to protect you in ways you'll find excessive." "I know. You know the nights when something goes wrong won't be manageable. Some of them will be very bad." "I know. You know that this world," he made the gesture that had no word, "it leaves marks on the people around it, not just on the men inside it." "I know," she said. A third time, and she meant it all 3 ways. Silvio looked at his espresso. He looked back at her. He nodded once, the nod of a man who has conducted an assessment and reached a conclusion. "He's different since you," he said. His voice had changed, warmer slightly, the professional register shifting into something more human. "I've known him for 15 years, since before his father died. I've watched him." He paused. "He's different." She thought about the Sunday mornings, the coffee, the Corriere della Sera, the fort-head kiss at 2 in the morning, the thumb on the back of her hand. "I know," she said. Silvio smiled. It was the first smile she'd ever seen from him, and it transformed his face. Suddenly he was a man who was capable of joy, not just assessment. "Then perhaps you are worth the complication," he said. She smiled back. "I've been trying to tell everyone that for months." Spring came to Milan slowly that year. She noticed it in the way she noticed most things, the accumulation of small changes. The light shifting from the flat white of February to something with warmth in it. The canals, when she walked along them on weekend mornings, reflecting something other than grey. The flowers on the Via della Spiga changing from forced hothouse things to something that had the quality of genuineness. She and Dante had been together, in whatever word applied, for 2 months. They had not named it. She didn't particularly need to name it. She had a clear enough sense of what it was. She wasn't sure he'd named things before, or found them easier for being named. What they had was the penthouse most nights. The 42nd floor, days, where they were professional and correct, and she brought the espresso at 9:15 and nobody said anything, though she suspected Enzo knew. Sunday mornings. The occasional evening when his other world demanded him and she waited and he returned. The phone calls that had become habitual, not functional calls, not updates, but the kind of call that a person makes to hear another person's voice. And the things they hadn't said. She thought about those on a Sunday when she was alone in the penthouse. Dante had an afternoon meeting, the discreet kind that didn't appear in the official calendar, sitting with a book she wasn't reading, looking at the city. They hadn't said, "I love you." She'd said it to herself, in the private accounting that she kept, but she hadn't said it to him. He was a man who moved toward the real thing slowly, who showed rather than stated. She'd been patient. She understood patience. She hadn't said, "What are we?" She knew what they were. She didn't need the question answered. He hadn't said, "I'm afraid of what might happen to you." But she could see it in the way he tracked where she was, the way Lorenzo's schedule had become more extensive, the way certain evenings, when something was tense in his world, he'd be on the phone with her in a way that was, she understood now, his version of keeping her close without saying so. She hadn't said, I would have chosen this even if I'd known in the beginning. Though that was the truest thing. She was thinking about these unsaid things when she heard the door. She looked up. He was back early. He came in with the specific quality she'd learned to read. Something had happened. Not the 2 a.m. emergency kind of happened, something smaller and more complicated. He came to the living room. He sat beside her on the couch. He looked at the view. "Mancini is back," he said. She'd heard the name, in the context of the 6-week deal that had collapsed. The Ferrara situation. Yes. He leaned his head back against the couch. She looked at his profile, the sharp line of it, the tiredness in it, that she noticed now in ways she hadn't at the beginning. He wants to renegotiate. From a position of strength or weakness? A pause. Something close to a smile. "You've been paying attention." "I always pay attention." She closed her book. "Weakness?" His backing fell through. "He needs us more than he did 3 months ago." He turned his head, looked at her. "It's a problem I know how to solve." "Then solve it," she said. "Don't think about it tonight." Easy to say. "I know." She shifted on the couch, turning toward him slightly. "Can I say something?" "You always do." "Something you might not want to hear." He looked at her with the expression that was the most open one, the one he'd found since the kitchen and the handhold at 2 a.m. "Say it." "You use the work as a way of not being present," she said. "When something is difficult, personally I mean, you go back to the work. Because the work is known and manageable, and personal things aren't." A long silence. "I know," he said. I'm not asking you to change it completely. I'm just telling you I see it." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "She left in February," he said. "The woman Silvio told you about. 8 years ago. February. Because He stopped. "Because I had a way of being in a room and being somewhere else in my head. She said I was present in my body and absent in every other way." Was she right? "Yes." He said it simply. "And I understood it better after she was gone than I did while she was there." A pause. "I've been trying—" He stopped again. The half-sentences that carried the most. "I know," she said. "I'm not—" He turned toward her. He put his hand on her knee in the uncalculated way he'd developed, the way of touching her that wasn't deliberate anymore, but was simply what his hands did. "I'm not easy to— Dante." She put her hand over his. "I know who you are. I chose you. I don't need you to be easy." She held his gaze. "I need you to be here." He looked at her. Then he pulled her toward him, slowly, with the deliberateness that was so characteristic, and she settled against his shoulder, and they sat with the view and the city and the spring evening. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes?" A long pause, long enough that she thought he'd decided not to finish it, then, quietly, "I think you may be the only person in my life who has ever seen me clearly and stayed anyway." She closed her eyes. She thought, there it is. The thing under everything. "I'm staying," she said. Present tense. "I'm staying." His arm tightened around her, by approximately nothing. Enough. It came in the form of a phone call to her personal cell. The number was blocked. It was a Tuesday, week 26, 6 months since the cream-coloured envelope had appeared on her desk between the espresso and the vendor invoices. She was in a cab on the way to the office. The voice was male, accented, not Milanese, something more southern. The message was short and specific in the way that only professionals can be short and specific about dangerous things. "You are in a position you don't understand," the voice said. "What Conti is, what he does. You think you know. You don't. Leave before it's too late for you to leave." The line disconnected. She sat in the cab and looked at her phone. She thought about the 5th secretary who'd found things and been let go. She thought about the cars watching the building. She thought about the 2 a.m. call and Dante's face in the lamplight when he'd said, "I need you to stay here." She thought, this is someone trying to destabilize. They're using me as a pressure point. She texted Dante from the elevator. "I received a threatening call, blocked number, no emergency." He appeared at her office door 6 minutes after she arrived. She told him everything, exact words, exact tone, her read of the intent. He listened without interrupting, which was his way. He was very still. The 0 Kelvin stillness, but the specific kind she now knew was cold fury rather than cold calm. When she finished, he said, "You're not frightened?" "I'm angry," she said. "That's different." "Who knows your personal number?" She thought. "Mara? My family? The utilities in my apartment?" She paused. "And anyone with access to certain databases?" He nodded. He was already composing a thought. She could see it in the set of his expression. "I'm going to find out who it was," she said. "I know. That's the right thing to do." She met his eyes. "But I want you to hear something first." He looked at her. "It won't work," she said. "Whoever this is, this tactic, threatening me to pressure you, it won't work. Not because I'm not afraid of being threatened, I am, but because I've already assessed the situation and I've already made my choice, and a phone call from a blocked number isn't going to revise that." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm telling you this because I need you to know it before you make decisions, so that the decisions aren't shaped by the assumption that I need to be protected from the consequences of my own choices." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she hadn't fully anticipated. He crossed to her desk, and he held her face in both hands, and he looked at her with the most open expression she'd ever seen on him. Not the partial openings of the past months, but the full thing, all the layers down. "What did I do," he said, "to deserve someone like you?" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about all of it. 5 months and then 2 more, the whole accumulation. The espresso cups, and the wax-sealed envelope, and the dance at the gala, and the archive room, and the cacio e pepe on the phone, and his mother's Sicilian recipe, and Silvio's smile over espresso, and the forehead kiss at 2 a.m. "You were honest with me," she said. "That's what you did." He kissed her. In her office, on the 42nd floor, in the daylight, which they hadn't done, which they'd been professionally correct about for 6 months. He kissed her with the quality she knew now. Deliberate, complete, without performance. She kissed him back. When it ended, she said, "Now go find out who called me." Something moved in his expression. The ghost of the laugh she'd first heard on the phone, asking about her dinner. The real thing was close to the surface now, these days. He went. The call was traced within 48 hours. A man named Vitelli, a mid-level operator affiliated with one of the other northern families, acting independently. Dante handled it, which she knew because the specific quality of tension on the 42nd floor eased after Thursday, the way barometric pressure eases after a storm. He told her, Vitelli. She said, handled? Yes. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. She filed it under known, managed, not requiring further examination. Good, she said. Elena, Dante. She looked at him. I'm still here. I'm still here tomorrow. I'm still here the day after that. Stop looking at me like you're waiting for me to change my mind. He held her gaze. Old habit. I know. She softened the professional register slightly. They were alone, the floor empty, the evening coming in through the windows. Break it. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man filing an instruction under implement immediately. It was a Sunday. Specifically, it was a Sunday in April, when Milan was doing what Milan does in April, performing spring with the committed beauty of a city that has been doing this for centuries and knows how. The fog had lifted, the parks were green, the light had that quality of southern European spring that is different from every other kind of spring, warmer and older somehow, like the light itself remembers something. They were walking. This was new. They'd been careful in the early months about visibility, about what the public dimension of them would mean. That Dante had made a decision, she understood, at some point she couldn't identify precisely, about what he was willing to protect versus what he was willing to have. And one of the things he'd decided to have was her, walking beside him in the Giardini Pubblici on a Sunday morning in April. She wore a pale blue coat she'd bought in March. He was in dark trousers and a jacket, which was the closest she'd ever seen him to casually dressed outside the penthouse. They walked. They talked about the Mancini renegotiation, which was progressing and which she'd been helping to think through because he'd begun including her in strategy conversations in the way that happened naturally when two people spend enough time together, the professional and personal bleeding into a unified thinking space. They talked about a book she was reading. They talked about his sister, Isabella, who was in Rome and who Elena had spoken to once on the phone. A conversation that had been warm and direct in a way that told Elena something important about the Conti family. They were sitting on a bench by the pond when he said it, not as a speech, not as a declaration. He said it the way he said the things that mattered most, quietly, as a statement of fact, with the particular weight of something that has been true for a long time and is only now being spoken aloud. I love you, he said. She looked at him. The park around them, the water, the light. He was looking at the pond, not at her, in the way he sometimes said the most significant things, looking slightly away, as if the words were easier without direct eye contact. But she could see his profile, the line of his jaw, the quality of stillness that was different from his professional stillness. This one was a man who has said a true thing and is waiting. She thought about the file labelled Examine Later. She thought about how full it had become. She thought about how she'd examined everything in it over months in the honest accounting she kept with herself. She said, I know. I've known for a while. He turned to look at her then. That's not an answer. I love you, she said. Since probably month 3, if I'm being precise. I love you in the way that I only love things I've decided to love clearly and completely. Both versions of you. He held her gaze. In the park light, his eyes were darker than usual, warmer. Both versions, he said. The man who runs the legitimate company, she said, and the man who runs the other one. The man who makes Sicilian pasta on Sunday evenings and reads the newspaper on Saturday mornings. The man who was alone for 8 years because he let someone go rather than ask her to carry what he carries. She held his eyes. And the man who decided not to let me go. I love all of him. He was quiet for a moment. You're not easy to deserve, he said. Nobody worth anything is easy to deserve, she said. He reached over and took her hand. He held it in the park, in public, in daylight, in the Giardini Pubblici of Milan on a spring Sunday, in the way that had meaning, because he was a man who understood what visibility cost and had chosen to pay it. They sat for a while, the park around them, Milan beyond. The Alps on the horizon, finally visible now that the fog had cleared, white and permanent and very far away. She thought about the cream-coloured envelope on her desk 7 months ago. She thought about the elevator rising and the doors opening onto the 42nd floor and the corridor of different air. She thought about the glass wall and 3 seconds of eye contact and a nod that said, "I am competent and I am here." She thought about how she'd had no idea, how she'd stood in the lobby of this building with her navy blazer and her espresso and her personnel file and no knowledge at all of what was waiting on the 42nd floor, what was waiting in the world she'd walked into. She thought, I would have chosen it anyway. Knowing everything, I would have chosen it. "What are you thinking?" he said. "That I would have chosen this," she said, "even if I'd known everything in the beginning. I would have still pressed the button for the 42nd floor." He turned to look at her. In his expression, the full thing, all the layers down, the man she'd spent 7 months learning. "You are," he said, slowly, as if choosing each word individually, "the most extraordinary person I have ever met." She smiled. "I know," she said. "It took you a while to notice." The ghost of the laugh, this time closer. "I noticed the first day," he said, "through the glass." "You stopped," she said. "You didn't look away," he said. They looked at each other in the April park, the city around them, the mountains visible, the whole ordinary, extraordinary fact of them there, together. "I never look away," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I stopped." 7 months after the cream-coloured envelope. She arrived at 8:45, as she always did. Enzo was at his desk. He looked up and nodded, with the particular expression she'd come to understand was his version of warmth, contained, professional, but genuinely present. He'd known about her and Dante for months. She suspected he'd known before she'd confirmed it. Enzo was very good at his job. "He's already in," Enzo said. "He's always already in," she said. "He came in at 7, Enzo said. There was something in his voice. She looked at him. "Something's happening." The Mancini negotiation concluded last night. A pause. It went well. She felt something ease in her chest, something that had been holding tension for weeks. "Good," she said. She went to her office. She prepared the espresso. She brought it to his office at 9:15. He was at his desk. He was looking at a document. He looked up when she came in. "You heard," he said. "Enzo told me." She set the cup down. "How did it resolve?" "Better than it deserved to." He leaned back. "Mancini agreed to the original terms. The Ferrara account is fully incorporated." 6 years of work, she said. Yes. She stood at the 2.5 arm lengths distance she'd calibrated on her first week. She looked at him, at Dante Conti, who ran 2 companies and had a penthouse and a dead father and a living sister in Rome and a scar on his left hand and a way of saying her name that was a decision. And she felt the full weight of the ordinary, extraordinary fact of it. He looked at her with the expression that was the full thing, the open one. He'd been wearing it more since the park in April, since the bench by the pond. "Elena," he said. "I know," she said. He smiled. It was a real one. She'd been collecting these over 7 months, filing them under evidence of the man under the professional surface. They were rare and therefore valuable. "You always know," he said. "I've been paying attention," she said. 7 months of paying attention. He stood. He came around the desk, as he did now more often, the desk less necessary as a barrier. He stood in front of her. "The Foundation is expanding the Calabria initiative," he said. "They need a director of operations." She looked at him. "A director of operations?" "Someone with organizational skills, an understanding of the organization, the ability to manage competing interests and maintain confidentiality." A pause. "And a strong sense of what the work actually means." "That's not a secretary role," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. She was thinking fast. She always thought fast, turning it the way she turned problems, the shape of it, the meaning of the offer, not just the professional offer, but what it meant in the structure of things. To have a role that was her own, that was built on her competence and not just her proximity. To be something in his world that had its own weight. "You think I can do it?" she said. "I know you can do it." Categorical, unapologetic. "You've been planning this." "Since the board meeting in January," he said. "When you told the board member about expanding the educational outreach, and he looked at me across the room like he was asking my permission to hire you." She thought about that, about January and the gala and the dance and the midnight blue dress. "That was a long time to keep a plan," she said. "I was waiting for you to be ready," he said. She thought about what ready meant. She thought about 7 months on the 42nd floor and what she'd learned in it. Not just the work, but the world, the shape of the organization, the family in the broadest sense, the weight of what it meant to be trusted by a man who trusted almost no one. She thought, "I'm ready." "Yes," she said. He nodded once. The nod of a man who knew the answer before the question, but was waiting for it to be said. "And the secretary role?" she asked. "We'll find someone." A pause. "Someone who warms the cup." She smiled. "That's a higher bar than it sounds." "I know." He looked at her. "You set it." They were standing in the middle of his office, the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, Milan laid out in the spring morning, the Alps visible on the horizon. She thought about the view from her apartment, small, pleasant, no Alps. She thought about the view from here, which was the whole city, and how that was, in more ways than geography, what the past 7 months had given her. "Dante," she said. "Yes." "I'm going to be very good at this job too." The full smile, the real one, the rare one. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm giving it to you." She thought, this is what it looks like when a dangerous man loves someone. Not softly, not with the easy warmth of people who have been safe their whole lives, with the absolute certainty of someone who has learned that the things worth having are worth the risk of having them, with the specific, unerring precision of a man who, when he decides something, decides it completely. She thought about the cream-coloured envelope. She thought about the elevator and the 42nd floor and the glass wall. She thought about 7 months of espresso cups and wax seals and 8 names on an index card and the archive room and the Ferrara file and the dance and the kitchen island and the bench in April. She thought, I didn't know. When I pressed the button for the 42nd floor, I had no idea. She thought, I'm so glad I didn't know, because knowing might have made me hesitate, and hesitating would have meant missing this. She looked at him, Dante Conti, who made rooms smaller by being in them, who had stopped in a corridor because a woman had not looked away, who had been saying her name like a decision for months before he said it that way, who had waited, who had not let her go. The espresso is getting cold, she said. He looked at the cup, back at her. It's already cold. I know, I was making a point. What point? That I've been standing here talking for 5 minutes, and the first rule of this floor is that the espresso is served at the correct temperature. The ghost of the laugh, which was becoming the real thing. You are, he said, the most infuriating. Extraordinary, she said. You said extraordinary. He picked up the cold espresso. He looked at it. He looked at her. Extraordinary, he confirmed, and infuriating. I can work with both, she said. She went back to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened her computer. She made the notations for the day, the calendar confirmations, the correspondence to be sorted. She was exactly where she'd been 7 months ago. The 42nd floor, the standing desk, the high-spec computer, the leather chair. The orchid, white, replaced monthly, on the corner of the desk. Enzo in the reception area. Milan beyond the glass. And then, not exactly the same. The man in the next office who had stopped in a corridor for 3 seconds and changed the whole shape of her life. Who said her name like it meant something specific. Who had stood up, eventually, from behind a desk that he'd used as a wall and crossed the space between them and chosen her the way she'd chosen him. Deliberately, completely, with full information. She opened the summary document for the morning review. She wrote, in the notes section for her own eyes, Mancini resolved. Ferrara account complete. New role beginning. She thought about adding something else. She looked at the line for a moment. Then she wrote, because she was an honest person, and the document was private, and some things deserved to be written down. Still here. Still choosing this. No regrets. She underlined it once. High priority. Then she went to make the second espresso, because she was already thinking ahead, because she always was. And she warmed the cup first, the way she always did, the way she always would. On the 42nd floor, in the city of Milan, in the life she'd walked into without knowing what it was, and stayed in because she'd decided to, Elena Vasquez made the espresso, and the light came in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and somewhere down the Alps were white on the horizon, and somewhere in the next room a dangerous man was reading documents and waiting for his coffee. And she knew with the certainty of someone who had spent 7 months paying careful attention, quietly, in the way he did everything that mattered, loving her. She brought it in. She set it on his desk. He looked up. She held his gaze. 3 seconds. The same 3 seconds as the glass wall in January, the same 3 seconds that had started all of it. She nodded once. He nodded back. She turned and walked out, back to her desk, back to the work, back to the life on the 42nd floor that had turned out to be, against all reasonable probability, against every warning, against the institutional knowledge of 7 secretaries and a woman named Chiara, who was now in Verona being happy, exactly what she'd needed. She sat down. She opened the Foundation operational files. She began. The city of Milan kept moving. The Alps were visible on the horizon. On the 42nd floor, everything was exactly as it should be, and nothing was the same as it had been. Thank you for listening to The Man the City Fears, a story about a woman so brave that she felt no fear.